The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Wow, born to be alive. Yes, we are. You're listening to Rosie Pekar on Until Now on W4CY Radio. And I've got a very exciting guest today that I'm really looking forward to talking to. And it's my first time I'll actually be speaking to Richard Morris, because we actually formally haven't met yet. So we've gotten connected up through some former police buddies of mine from Australia that have hooked me up with Richard from his former police buddies in the US, and we plan to really kick serious butt today. All those bloody useless thoughts that you say would hold you back, there's going to be no excuses in this program here today. So welcome to the program, Richard.
Well, thank you, Rosie. It's a great honor for me to be here.
And for those that are unaware of Richard's background, I just called him the Grand Slam Master. And the reason why is I thought he can slam you into any new reality, physically or mentally, that you want to move to. He's a 10th degree black belt in American karate and Tae-Kwon-do, and he's the founder of Shizen-Na karate. And if I pronounced it incorrectly, he'll correct me later on, which means in Japanese, the natural way to fight with empty hands, which I love unarmed combat because I'm only 5'2" and I was, policing in the era of the 80s. We needed a little bit more than our mouth because it would only get us so far. But he's been inducted into the Karate and Kickboxing Hall of Fame, the Karate Masters Hall of Fame, the Masters Hall of Fame, the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame, the Museum of Sports Karate Hall of Fame, and as one of the world black belts, living legends, and we've got him here today. But you know what? This martial artist is not only from his former policing background, which is over 36 years as a gang detective sergeant within intelligence within Texas there and other locations. He's also a former United Methodist pastor. So this is a preacher who can teach you. That I have no doubt. I don't normally do a big, drum roll into who I'm speaking to. However, I thought I really want to do service to the people listening, because sometimes people today, they need a reason as to why they want to listen anymore. Who are you? Where have you been? What have you done? What have you got to show? Are you tap dancing in front of us? Or what's happening that's going to get my minute of interest? So I want people to sit up and actually pay attention, not in respect of you, but in respect of themselves. This is the opportunity you really get to learn from a master. And a master I listened to in India, he says, if you woke up this morning and you're able to open your eyes and look at that clock, you've got a reason to smile, because there's a million other people around the world who didn't get to do that today. So let's take it from there, because Richard Morris is also the founder of Ziglar Blue. And I'm going to cover a lot that helps people with PTSD. I've got so many questions for you, Rora. Richard, you had me thinking, how the hell did I get connected to this woman?
It's my great honor, Rosie.
But what I'm going to sit back and relax and enjoy y'all southern drawl, which in America they'll be used to, but for us as Australians, and again, we have Asians listening. We have those from the Greek islands. I know I've received, correspondence from lots of different people around the world that listen to this program. So if you are listening and you've got some questions along the way, all you do is go to w4cy.com and click on the right-hand side and ask your questions. We've got a couple of comments already. That was cute. A preacher that can teach her. Well, I guarantee it's going to be more than cute by the end of this program. And how does one learn respect their self? I think this is a message that you, having worked specifically in gang intelligence, and I assume, though we should never assume, but I'm going to for the sake of all listeners, that you certainly mixed and merged with lots of different identities from a criminal element that I would pose didn't have a lot of respect for self.
Well, that's true. And I believe that the people that are involved in crime, the ones that are involved in violent crime, and I've interviewed tens of thousands of suspects for robbery, murder, you name it, gang-related crimes, drive-by shootings. And most of them, they're just broken people. And something happened in their life where they took that wrong turn, that wrong path. I'm just so grateful in my life that I was able to avoid those detours because I was faced with them as well. And to me, it's heartbreaking. My last assignment as a gang intelligence sergeant, I worked with the FBI, DEA, all the federal agencies. I was on the DEA task force, and I was on the Homeland Security task force for Homeland Security investigations. And in working with all the federal agencies and the NCIS, all the military intelligence, we put over 120 drug cartel and source of supply people in jail over a 2-year investigation that we did. And that literally made it hard to buy heroin anywhere in the streets of Texas and the central United States for a long time. So I hope those people aren't too mad at me.
Well, I actually don't mind infuriating those type of people. It's, not concern me. Back in my 20s when I was a police officer, and it still doesn't concern me today. I work in prisons and not talking to the prisoners directly, the intermediaries, the prison staff, right. Because sometimes, as we know, there can be a fine line between the difference of who's behind bars and who's not. And, that's the difference between who gets caught and who doesn't. But that important question of how does one learn respect their self? Because I'm quite sure you would have, mixed with people on the wrong side that, may have been able to take their circumstances and their opportunity and turn their lives around for the better. Yes.
I've been shot 4 times. I've been stabbed several times, been shot at more times than I can count, got run over. And that was by a policeman. He was a horrible driver. And been hit by several cars, freeways and so forth. But I've also and I've been in a position where I've had to take lives, but I've also been in a position to save many people's lives. And that to me is what made it all worthwhile, to have one person, when you can turn their life around, get them back on track. Maybe they've been involved in drugs or prostitution or whatever it may be. I think with God's help and some compassion, that we can reach into the hearts of those people and make a difference. And so I started a program called the Invisible People Program because they're the people we don't want to see. They're the people that don't look different than us. They talk differently. They dress differently. They're poor or homeless, and maybe they're drug addicts or they're prostitutes. And those are the people we don't want to see in church oftentimes. So I made it a point to go out as a police officer and a pastor and police chaplain, to go out as a uniformed officer. I would go and I would feed the homeless and the hungry and the drug addicts and the prostitutes. And to make a long story short, I've been able to get several people off of heroin and cocaine, away from prostitution. I have one couple that are good friends of mine now. And this couple, they had a suicide pact. They were doing $300 to $500 of heroin a day between them, just prostituting themselves out. And 11 years ago, I was able to get them off of the drugs. They started by taking painkillers. Then they got addicted, after being addicted to the opiates, got onto heroin. They lost 4 kids. They lost a car, 2 cars, a beautiful home, lost their business. They certainly lost their health. They just lost everything. And God put it in my heart to show compassion to them. And that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of, is that I've been able to see this young couple and many like them to have productive jobs, to be doing well today, to making a difference in the lives of other people. That's where I get my joy.
I think that's a key point in self-respect, is because we often are unaware of the ripple effect of the actions we take, how they positively or negatively can impact another. I myself remember a young girl back in my days of policing, and she was, I don't even remember what she was arrested for, but she was held in the cell, and I actually took time out and went and sat with her, which is not my normal behaviour, but it must have been a very quiet evening, and I was stuck in the station, which again, for me, fortunately, was a rarity because I hated being stuck in the station. And I went and sat with her, and I don't recollect a single thing I spoke with her about. However, I met that young girl years later, as she was now a mother, and she had turned her life around, and she retold the story to me of what I had said to her, and it worked to inspire her to make a difference in her own life. And I thought, wow, I don't even recollect that I ever sat on a prison floor and spoke with you. I thought that was out of my character. But they remember, and that's the difference. That's what self-respect is about. And now, someone had made the comment, are you a stunt man? I'll just read a little bit of Richard's resume so that you're aware he's not a stunt man. He retired in 2000. Oh, well, okay, I take that back.
I was a stunt mechanic back in the 80s, and I just got away from that. It's pretty dangerous if you don't take time to train and have all the safety equipment. I was with the American Stunt Association, and so I did quite a bit, but that's not for me. I'm too old for that.
But that wasn't where you got shot and stabbed, was it?
No, that was just at work.
Yeah, exactly. So his work was, he retired in 2014 from the Fort Worth Police Department's Tactical Investigations Division as the Gang Intelligence and Gang Detective Sergeant after nearly 36 years. So he's worked closely with the FWPD, Homeland Security, Intel, criminal tracking, human trafficking, SWAT, homicide, and narcotics units. So if you understand that he's been within the police force for a lengthy period of time, however, at the same time, he is also, I saw the lovely photograph of Zig Ziglar that has said thank you to his friend, student, and brother, meaning yourself. So you've trained together with Zig Ziglar?
Oh, yes. I was his karate teacher, and he became my mentor. I met him in 1984. I was doing a movie in Dallas, and I saw that he was coming to town. A friend of mine, Barry Hall, with the Miss Texas pageant, he was the president then, now he's a CEO for the Miss Texas, Miss America program, and he gave me 2 tapes. And he said, Richard, have you heard of Zig Ziglar? I said, no, I know what Zigzag cigarettes are. I said, is it a sewing machine company? He said, no, Richard, man, this is the greatest motivational speaker and business coach that you could ever find. And so he loaned me 2 tapes. And so my karate school, just from listening to those 2 tapes, it went from making this one school, I had 2 schools, but one school made about $7,000. The next month it made over $30,000, and later I was making over $800,000 a year. And that was back in 1986 and 7, 5, 6, and 7. And that was a lot of money back then.
It certainly is. That's many. Well, in Australian dollars, that's about 4 million.
Yeah, it's about 2.5 or so here.
Yeah.
2.5 or 3 million, but I don't make that kind of money anymore. I decided I was just working way too hard. And as a matter of fact, I met Zig, and then I gave a Christian devotional at his company. And boy, I just fell in love with him. He reached around and grabbed me by my shoulders, and he looked in my eyes, and he said, Richard Morris, you are special. And there have been times, difficult times. I mean, there was a time that I was suicidal, and I asked God, I said, well, God, why should I not take my life? And give me some encouragement. My dad had just passed away. It was just a very sad time. And then I heard Zig's voice, Richard Morris, you are special. I could hear it just like he was saying it to me then. And then I thought, okay, maybe there's something that I'm still to do with my life. And anyway, don't worry, I didn't take my life. I'm still here. But
well, I do talk to dead people, but not on radio yet.
And that was, for me, it just, Zig was such a great influence in my life. He became like a dad to me. He called himself my Dutch uncle. And so I'd go to church with he and his family and go out to eat with them and spend time with him. I'd call him at night. He'd call me. As a matter of fact, if you ever see some of the books that Zig's picture is on, he has an ichthus, which is the fish symbol, with a 7. And he wore one of those for many years. A friend of his gave him one. But you'll look on some of his books and you'll see one that has 7 diamonds in it. And that was from me. He was a very dear friend of mine, and I just loved him. When he fell down the stairs. He didn't want to wake up his wife, Jean, and he was walking in the middle of the night to get to his office to make some notes. And this time he slipped and hit the steps and had a horrible fall, got a severe traumatic brain injury, and later had a brain shunt, eventually got Alzheimer's. But I got a call from him one day. He said, Richard Morris, this is Zig Ziglar. Well, I knew who it was. His voice is so distinctive. And he said, I remember how you helped me when I took classes from you before. You helped me with my stretching and my flexibility especially. He said, I'm having a hard time walking. Would you be willing to help me? I said, well, of course I would. So I set it up with Lori Majors, his executive assistant, just a most wonderful and faithful employee and friend of the Ziglar family. And then also with Tom Ziglar, my good friend. As a matter of fact, Tom takes karate from me now. He's one of my private lesson students, and he's one of my coaches. I love that family. As a matter of fact, Julie Ziglar is one of my karate students. I just love them all.
Well, certainly his message to you made a ripple effect for the positive within your own life.
Yes, and I can tell you dozens of people that are alive today only because I was still alive and able to help people because I didn't give up on myself. And I'm so thankful that I didn't go that direction. That's
really an important message, because I know we've got some, former police as well as serving police that'll be part of the listening audience today. That's why I mentioned Ziglar Blue, because PTSD is getting quite a workout in many different arenas and industries today for all sorts of reasons. And for those that aren't aware what PTSD, it is post-traumatic stress disorder that people suffer from to differing degrees. But in the last year alone, I've seen 2 police pass away last year, another unexpectedly attempted on his life only several weeks ago, and another a year before, that were all personal friends of mine. And I've been down that path myself, as I've spoken on a previous episode. But in working with police today, what would be the top 3 strategies that you would share to start to address and take back their own power and their own value, enhance their own value and that respect for themselves? Because when we reach that point, we know, we're valuing other people's opinions, not our own.
That's true, and it's irrelevant what other people think. What I teach, and I've done several seminars. As a matter of fact, Tom Ziglar and I are going to do a seminar in Casper, Wyoming, in October. We're really looking forward to that. It's a 3-day seminar, 6,000 to 9,000 first responders, police officers or families, firefighters, and so forth. I am so looking forward to that. And what I do is I bring forth the message about developing strong relationships. And
yes,
that has to be done. And the relationship, you have to begin with yourself.
Exactly.
The Bible tells us, and it comes from Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and it's known as the greatest commandment that Jesus gave. And he said, we're to love the Lord our God with all of our heart and all of our soul and all of our mind. And we're to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so
And for
doesn't mean
those
we
that
love
aren't,
ourselves.
I just want to intercept in there, Richard, because there are those that aren't Christianity based that will be listening, and to understand that in a simple context. You know, we learnt it in the law of policing, which was look after number one. And what look after number one originally sounds quite selfish. However, what look after number one meant was who looks after number one? It's your mother, your father, it's your neighbours, it's your friend, it's everyone you come into contact with. So once you learn that law, that you look after everyone who could possibly ever look after you in any way, shape or form, then you're understanding that it's a law of synergy, it's a law of connection. And it's irrespective whether your mum and dad's still alive, a brother and sister's still alive, whether you have a partner, whether you have children, because I think that's a big issue for those with PTSD, is not feeling that they have relationships.
Well, and I think it's not I'm not speaking on religion at the time. I'm speaking of relationship. We have to know there's someone, something bigger and greater and grander than us.
Yes.
That loves us, that cares for us. And like you said, like mom, dad, it could be a lot of different people. And the second thing is you have to learn to love your neighbor. In other words, love other people. I was asked by my police chief at the time, it was Jeff Halstead. He said, Richard, I have never seen a sergeant that is so loved and so respected by his troops. I've never seen a group of men and women that would work so hard as they do for you. He said, what's the secret? I said, well, they love me because I first love them. They work hard for me because I first work hard for them. They know that I will stand in the midst with them and in between them and anyone, including yourself, Chief, that comes to face them. I want to let them know that they have someone on their side. And so just like where I help people who are down and out on the streets. Again, it's about relationship. If our only focus is self-focus, if it's up to me, if it's going to be, then it's up to me, which is, I'm very familiar with that saying, and I know that you've quoted that. And the problem is sometimes, even if we do the very best we can, things still don't happen. And when that happens, we need to realize that's not the end of the world. We just have to find a place.
Intercept again and say that I use that quote, if it's going to be, it's up to me. That's one of my mentor's quotes, and I used it for him, but in the area only of the realm of mind. So I utilize the area of the mind.
Sure.
And thoughts, and I want them to understand is their own thoughts are their domain, so they get the opportunity to play and run the program that they want to have on. And if there's a program running that says that they're unworthy, that they're unlovable, that they're not good enough, whatever it is, that's where, if it's going to be, it's up to me to change that programming. Because if you're waiting for something to happen outside of yourself, and when many people do, they say, I'll only respect you when you show me respect. You know, we hear this from the young kids, and it's like, no, you're missing the message. The message is your own walking affirmation every second of every minute of every hour of every day, and that's accumulating, and you are listening to you continually. So that's where I'd make that home territory the best territory, that you've got that mental space to play in. So that's my, if it's to be, it's up to me, because I don't believe that I'm the greatest, far from it. I believe wholeheartedly in power beyond myself, because, and any human being that sits there and goes, oh, I don't believe in, call it God, call it Buddha, call it Allah, call it whoever or whatever you want, the name is what gets us disassociated. And so that's why I say call it whatever you want, though God itself has a far greater power because of its use and energy that it carries with it from a scientific perspective. However, we didn't make the planet. We didn't make all that we observe. So
Deepak Chopra, if you've ever had a chance to read his work, is fantastic.
Love him.
And he was a good friend of Zig Ziglar's. Well, I think one of the first things we have to do is to work on the relationship with ourselves, and that begins with self-talk. And have positive affirmations. And as silly as it may sound, to stand in front of the mirror, look yourself in the eyes, and tell some positive qualities about yourself. And sometimes we don't feel that way. We don't feel very positive. But once you begin to speak it, it begins to take a life, and it really does make a big difference. And
I was going to say I actually used an exercise in programs where I tell people to go home, and if you want to know how you really feel about yourself, look in the mirror and look in your own eyes and say, I love you. And I, for myself personally, in my younger days, found when I first discovered this exercise, and I'm not sure who introduced it to me, I could not do it. I could not look myself in the eyes and say that to myself. And it identified for me all the challenges and difficulties that I already possessed within myself. So let alone go out there and try and save the world, that many as speakers do. You know, you will have met them. They're not authentic. They say one thing on the stage, but when they go and live their lives, we have one here in Australia that is quite well known, but what may not be so well known is his propensity for domestic violence. Yet here he is putting on programs to empower women. And I find that abhorrent and shameful. However, it's not for me to judge. What I do is what I do within my own realm of influence and my sphere of control, which may just be myself when I wake up in the morning. It might be myself and my son. It might be, you know, the cat I come across and give a pat. That's my area of influence.
Sure. And it gets sometimes a little harder to look in the mirror. I got a haircut a few weeks ago, and man, I felt good about myself. I've got a haircut, and then he put the mirror right in front of me. I just could have slapped him.
But see, that's the thing. I say, you know, the last one in the prisons, it's funny that they said, we're going to practice that when we get home, because I said, now when you look in the mirror, just say, hey, they're good looking. What you got cooking? You know, because we look as women, because that's the only perspective I can speak from. My young son says to me, you know, what are my changes through puberty, Mum? And I said, you're going to have to ask a bloke, honey, because I only know what they've told me. I can't give you first-hand experience. So my experience as a woman looking in the mirror is we look for faults. We go, oh, my God, look at these more lines here. This is sagging. This has gone south, and I'm quite sure it shouldn't be. You know, we find these faults instead of like, wow, I'm amazing. You know, this body has seen me through, 50 plus years. You know, in another week or so, it'll be 51. So I'm finally clocking up some that I never thought I would actually get. Now, it makes no difference. I've got another lady down the road from me who's 98 that is more sprightly than some of the 35-year-olds I've seen. So it is a state of mind. My father at 80 was riding 100 kilometres on his push bike because he never had a vehicle other than his bike. So it's what we hang around and associate. And that's what I thought was, really important. The message that you were coming from today, that having worked in areas with such a level of despair, with depravity, with extreme violence and brutality that most other individuals don't get to see. Within the police force, we can see it to varying extents. Some of us get exposed to a great deal. Some live a charmed life and stay in the station forever and a day. There's all differences. It's not about comparing ourselves to another. It's about, as you've started to talk about, that it's what's going on in our own minds, that self-talk that we're giving to ourselves. And I found with myself with PTSD, I just kept reliving particular situation that I felt without power when I normally should have had power. And I was watching something happen before my eyes that was devastating, that I could do nothing to change. And I think that's the worst response for a human being, to feel vulnerable and at the mercy of whatever that circumstance is. But then to keep regurgitating and replaying that memory long after the event has happened, we're then doing it to ourselves. But we want to keep putting the finger and pointing it somewhere outside of ourselves and giving the power outside of ourselves, saying, no, it's not me doing it. It's that bugger that did it.
Right. Well, I tell you, I think if we will start learning how to say positive things to ourselves, then we will be able to accept those positive comments from other people. And one of the manifestations of a poor self-image is when people give you a compliment, say, well, you have beautiful hair. Say, oh, well, it's falling out. Well, you really look good today. Yeah, but I don't have the energy I used to. We just need to learn to say thank you
Yes, exactly.
And
Yes, sorry, I was going to say police do that quite regularly, and women do that quite regularly. We attacked first and it's almost like we've got to be talked into accepting something nice. So I've been asked a question by a listener, and for those that are listening to W4CY Radio, I'm talking to Richard Morris from Richard Morris Seminars, and he is a butt kicker extraordinaire, and I use the term butt as in an acronym, bloody useless thoughts. So even though he comes from the background, and a very serious background from law enforcement, that you can go back and recheck, if you've got any questions on how to move from your perspective to expand that perspective to one that's more successful for you, go across to w4cy.com and click on the right-hand side and you can ask your questions. So one I've been asked is, how can we make a difference? Well, I know you certainly are, so let's give some suggestions.
I was featured in a book. I wrote a chapter in a book called A Difference Maker. It's by Michelle Prince, and it was in volume 5, and one that makes a difference in the lives of other people. And the story I told was when I had low self-esteem as a teenager. We were very poor, and I started taking karate, and I just got to where I didn't feel very strong about myself. I didn't have the nice clothes like some of the kids at school. I didn't drive a nice car, and I was a year younger. I started high school at 13 years old, where most were 14 and 15 when they started. And so I was a little behind the curve physically and in my maturity. But I started taking karate, and one day I got really beat up by one of my teachers named Billy Watts, dear friend. I did get him back later. But Billy was a national champion, one of the toughest men in the world at the time, and I must have weighed 135 or 40 pounds. I was a blue belt, so I was a beginner. And I mean, I got beat up so bad, I crawled on my little motorcycle and rode home and told my dad I quit karate. And I'd never missed a class. I was there every day. As a matter of fact, I've never missed a class since a week of training since 1971, or a week of teaching since 1971. I love this stuff. I think I'm addicted, maybe in a good way.
Well, that's you become what you hang around, and what you became is something exceptionally successful.
Yes. And so my dad said, well, we'll go up and talk to Mr. Burleson tomorrow. My teacher was Pat Burleson, just a wonderful, wonderful, tough man, and legend in the martial arts worldwide. And so we went up there, and Mr. Burleson said, Richard, how come you're not here teaching class? I wondered where you were. I said, well, I'm quitting karate. I had 2 black eyes, broken nose, broken ribs, plus I got beat up after that. And I said, I'm not taking karate anymore. He said, what? He said, well, let me talk to your dad. So he and my dad went back. He said, Richard, would you take the class and teach the class at least until I get through talking to your dad? So I can't just leave them out here. I said, well, yes, sir. So I started teaching the class. It was November 17, 1971. And I was teaching, and he came out about 35, 40 minutes later. And he says, well, Richard, how do you like the class? I said, I like it, sir. He said, you enjoy teaching? I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, class, how did you like Richard teaching class today? We liked it, sir. And he said, Richard, would you like to be the teacher for this class? Well, I'd forgotten all about how I was beat up. I said, yes, sir. So that day I took on the mantle of responsibility, which is something else that we have to take responsibility for what we do for ourselves, and to reach out and help other people, teaching and helping in some way. And so only after my dad died, many years later, 40-something years later, did I find out that my dad told Pat Burleson while they're back there drinking coffee, he said, I want you to help make a man out of my son. And I was at a belt test. Billy Watson, the champion that beat me up so bad that day, I was one of the examiners on his promotion. He was going for 8th degree black belt.
I love it when things come full circle.
Yeah. There's a word for that we use here in America. It's called nana nana nana. But I love Bill Watson.
So professionally. And the tongue, no doubt. I'm sure there's an emoji for that.
So I made the comment. I said, had that not happened that day, and had I not been under that situation where I was under so much pressure to quit, had my dad not asked Pat Burleson to get me to teach, I've taught over 100,000 people now, Rosie. I've been able to make a difference in the lives of so many people. So many people are alive today. I get testimonies over and over again, my students or police officers that I've trained or something where I've made a difference in their life. And it's only because that my dad had the wisdom, and Pat Burleson had the wisdom to put me in a position of responsibility at a young age, at 14 years old, 15 years old. And so at 15 years old, I was able to take that mantle of responsibility, and I took it seriously. Like I said, I've never missed a week of teaching. If I'm in Mexico, or if I'm in Ireland or England or India or wherever I am, I always find someone to teach if I'm going to be there a week, because I'm going to continue to honor the commitment that I made to teach back in 1971. And I think we need to learn to make these kind of commitments to ourselves, yes, especially.
Well, that's the personal respect that was engendered within yourself, because I've always said, and it's obvious in listening to you, that you are a natural leader without doubt, and that's why you've developed such a strong bond of affection from all those that I've spoken to that certainly know you, that speak very highly, and that's a strong sense of camaraderie is born, because natural leaders, I don't believe, are born. I believe they emerge. The circumstances show up that separate what I call the men from the boys. And you see the men step up and the women step up equally the same, because of the circumstances around them. I have lots of my friends that simply say, if there's an emergency, I know who I want to be standing next to, because that's my skill set. But I keep getting put in environments that are already organized and structured. It's like, well, what's a girl to do here? There's no chaos, there's no drama. And I have to laugh, because we've got a few police forums, and they put some, as we do, some humorous comments on. And one was that, because you train others in situational awareness, and the general public are now, through necessity of circumstances in the world we live in today, having to become aware of situational awareness for their own personal safety and professional safety. But as police, we did it automatically. There's none of us that would go into a hotel and would ever sit with our back to the door. And I laughed. I was saying, anyone else have the trouble? Like, I can't put my legs underneath the table. It's other people pointed out. They're like, you can sit facing me. And it's like, oh, I didn't even realize. And, I had to do a photo shoot holding a gun. And one of the officers that trained in firearms safety, he made a comment later, and he said, Rosie, what's this finger on the trigger bit? And I had to laugh, because I thought that wasn't my natural response. It was the photographer had to keep reminding me, put your finger back on the trigger, put your finger back on, to take the photo, because it was never on there. It was always beside the gun. So they were our habits, and they're habits that helped us. So one of the listeners has asked, is it a discipline to learn? And I would say, it's our habit that we make, that you made it your habit, you made it your discipline for yourself, because it was something you valued. Is that what you share to others?
Yes, and I tell you what, I teach a lot of the spec ops, the Delta operators, Delta Force, Navy SEALs. I've got students, CIA, FBI, you name it, that train with me on a regular basis, many of them. And when I train these people, I have a program that I call, it's my Fight Science Laboratory. I study the science, the psychology and the physiology and the anatomy of fighting. And I have done tens of thousands of hours of research. So every time I worked a murder, and I've worked as many as 5 in one day, for example, I worked a lot of murders. And when I would work these, when I had people that are living or aggravated assaults or robberies and so on, I would always interview not only the victims, but the suspects, when the victims were still alive, but the suspects, witnesses, everybody, and find out why they did things a certain way. And so I study the science of what makes the body work physiologically. So I know you haven't heard of him at the time, but Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman is one of the leading authorities in human aggression in the world. He wrote a book that was nominated for a Pulitzer called On Killing. Yes. And he wrote a book called On Combat, and he and I are writing a book called On Fighting. That's my forte, is the science of fighting on the street. Everything, any kind of fight on the street, I study that very deeply and teach that. And so when I teach someone, one of the first things we have to do, well, let me give an example. I talked about we have to have a strong self-image. If you don't feel like that you have any value, it's kind of hard to keep your hands up. It's hard to get the strength or the energy to protect yourself because you don't feel like you're worth it. We need to remember we are more valuable than any diamond, any gem, anything at all in the world. And because we have the value that we have is the value in being able to have influence in the lives of other people. And like you, as you know, it's a logarithmic, it's a mathematical progression where you end up helping someone who helps 2 people, who helps 4 people, and so on. And you can reach tens of thousands or millions of people just by reaching a few and making a difference. So the way to make a difference in someone else's life is, first, you got to believe that you have some value. And if you don't know what it is, find someone who can help you to find that value. And that's where you have speakers and trainers and coaches. I'm a professional coach, and I train coaches, and working with relationships, whether it's for sales or for, building more clients and so forth. But it all goes back to, how does the person feel about themselves? And when
exactly.
you learn,
I recently just said to my young son, because, so many people in this modern age of technology are besotted and caught up, immersed with their mobile phone, the iPhone. And I said, they're forgetting that the eye in front of the phone is the most important piece of technology that they're ever going to let their hands on, which is themselves, the eye. So the phone is secondary. As amazing as they think that technology is, it is nothing compared to the eye that came before the iPhone.
Hey, that reminds me of something about relationships. I do a lot of study about the brain and about the body. And the interesting thing is, if you look at a baby or you have a little baby, and no matter how much your mouth is moving, they're looking at your eyes. They're looking at your eyes. The eyes are truly the window of the soul. When you talk to people, we need to learn to look in the eye. And it's interesting, and maybe it's because as a dominant right-handed person, I tend to look at people's right eye more so even than the left eye. But I'll go back and forth, but I'll spend most of the time on the right eye. So you might notice that. Where am I looking? And when you do
you're
that,
better than most blokes, Richard. I got to tell you, Australian males aren't looking at either of the girls' eyes. I'm going to get in trouble for that one, but they know it's
like
true.
What Zig Ziglar says. He says you can tell the character of a man by where he focuses his eyes, and something to that effect. And so one thing that I've learned is I can be standing in front of beautiful women or whatever. I try to look at the eyes, or I try to look at my wife's eyes, because if I don't, I'm gonna be looking at trouble, right?
Exactly. And I can remember being in police uniform, which ours is a plain blue shirt. It's very nondescript and it's rather loose fitting. And, back then I was, 10 kilos lighter than I am today, which, would be about your 100 pounds if lucky.
Right.
So I never had too much weight to throw around. So, I didn't have much, in my chest area to start with anyway. And the blue shirt certainly helped to disappear whatever I had. And I can remember a guy coming into the police station to report something at the counter, and I'm short, like I'm 5'2", and this guy's about 6 foot. So you imagine where his eyes are at, and they're nowhere above my neck level. And I'm thinking, you're going to get neck strain, buddy, trying to look that low. It's like, seriously? So there are those individuals that haven't learnt this yet.
Well, I'm going to tell you something interesting. It's interesting how sometimes the short people get with tall people. He's like a nephew to me. One of my best friend's son is 6'7", 6'8", and his wife's about 5'2". So the first thing I said is, man, they better find them a good chiropractor.
Yeah, my first buddy out of the police academy was 6'4", and I was 5'2", and they used to say, "Here comes the long and the short of it." So
my daughter is about 5. I think she's about 5'3", 5'4", and she's a 6th-degree black belt. Weighs about 110, and I've got some people that are over 6'10". I've got some big boys and girls that work out with me. Mostly it's the boys that are big, but this guy's 6'10", about 420, and my daughter can handle him. So that's kind of cool.
I was going to say, they tend to forget that, the bigger you are, the actually easier you are to handle. So
as long
it's
as
us
you know
little
how to
ones. Yeah, it's the little ones that are, you got to watch out for. You haven't got so much to grab hold of. So
it reminds me of
listeners laughing.
Reminds me of a story Zig said. He says, the tornadoes and hurricanes get all the attention, but it's the itty-bitty termite that takes itty-bitty bites that does the most damage. And so it's not the size physically that you are, it's the size of your heart, I think.
We call it the size. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. So, Richard, I've loved absolutely having you on. For our listeners that want to know more about what you do, where can they go to?
You can go to www.richardmorris, it's MORRIS, seminars.com, or you could email me at richardmorrisseminars.com, and I'd love to connect with you. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Well, I dare say you'll have a few catching up with you, and I'll just share a few of our listeners' comments before we go, that you have so many good sayings. I love this show. Oh, me too. This is a kick. Yes, it's about kicking butt, those bloody useless thoughts, especially when it's what you are thinking that you're not that is holding you back. So, if we do nothing else, it's promoting getting rid of those bloody useless thoughts that are holding you back. And we always talk to our guests and find out what's their most extraordinary experience, which due to the fact that I'm got about 30 seconds left, I'm going to have you on all over again. And our last comment from a listener is fabulous show. So thank you so much, Richard Morris, for helping me have a fabulous show here. And I'm looking forward to having you on again and to kicking butt in Texas, because I will be over there to see you and the boys. And things happen. So I look forward to more in the future.
Well, thank you. And if I ever get a chance to come to Australia, I'll look you up. I've got many friends.
We're going to be making it happen, Richard. The sky's always the limit. You haven't been anywhere if you haven't been to Australia. So for those looking for more inspiration, head over to Kick Butt. You've heard me say it. It's not with 2 T's, otherwise you're going somewhere else. Kickbutt with 1 T.com.au, because I am Australian, though I know most of you listening are not. Until next week. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Richard.
Thank you.